All right. So again, welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the presentation of our artificial intelligence here on this wonderful Wednesday night. I have with us a fantastic speaker. His name is Vicar Sayeedi. He is the host of the AI and You podcast, author of the novel The Genome Affair, and he is lectured around the world and has over 70 podcasts available to listen to. Just a few housekeeping items here for Zoom. We do ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation. We have a very large group tonight. We want to make sure everybody can hear, so we don't hear anybody's kids or TVs in the background. If you have questions, please put them in chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat for questions, and then our speaker will be answering them at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions that are of technical issues, please feel free to message me directly as librarian Julie, and I will try to help you out with that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our wonderful presenter, Vicar Sayeedi. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Julie. And hello, everyone, and good evening. And thank you for joining. And let me just fire up my screen here. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen. So as Julie mentioned, the topic is artificial intelligence. Where are we today and where are we going? I'm going to spend about 10 minutes just in giving an introduction to artificial intelligence for those who may be less familiar. And I'll spend a few minutes, about 15 minutes, talking about some of the contemporary use cases of AI. So in public health, mental and physical well-being, education, jobs, and security. Then I'll be talking for about 15 minutes about how AI might impact society, some ethical concerns, human-machine hybrids, societies with AI versus those without, and a brief discussion into a topic of connectomics. And then we'll have some time at the end for your questions. And as Julie said, you can type them into the chat and she'll monitor all of those. Okay. In the coming years and decades, artificial intelligence can be expected to impact virtually every aspect of our lives, from the economy to the job market and workplace, to government and international relations, to world affairs and military conflict. It seems no area of human endeavor will be spared. So given this reality, perhaps it's best we have at least a working understanding of AI and how it might shape our future. The term artificial intelligence means different things to different people. To most, AI is simply the ability to simulate human intelligence in a machine. Implicitly, this refers to the quantitative dimension of human intelligence, the ability some people possess that enables them to think and manage complex ideas and problems that may have a substantial computational dimension. But scholars of human intelligence believe that quantitative intelligence is just one form or dimension of human intelligence. There are a number of other discrete dimensions. This raises important questions. Most of the specialized AI agents we've developed today are highly quantitative or pattern matching in their ability. But humans have perhaps 8 or even more different dimensions of intelligence. So what happens if we develop AI agents that simulate only this one dimension of human intelligence, the quantitative dimension? Historically, society has considered people to be intelligent if they innately possess skills or demonstrate an ability to acquire intelligences or skills that can be readily monetized. As society evolves, the intelligences and talents they value evolve as well. People who do not possess the intelligences or skills that are easily monetized in the age in which they live are viewed in a dim light and are often considered as inferior members of society. This stratification of society can leave these people in a very disadvantaged position. But these people often possess other intelligences and skills, skills that, while not easily monetized, do provide great value to society. These intelligences often enable them to build handmade furniture or musical instruments, to write literature, musical compositions, or poetry, to paint frescoes, portraits, or landscapes, to chisel stone or wood to form beautiful sculpture, to develop and perform various levels and methods of pedagogy, to coach young people, and so many other activities that enrich human culture and life. Furthermore, some amongst us are strongly left-brained, others strongly right-brained, while some humans are blessed with strong aspects of both. Some amongst us are highly rational and have little room for impulse or emotion, while others have a high degree of emotional intelligence. In some circumstances, the highly rational person is the one needed to lead an organization or society. But in other circumstances, leadership underpinned by emotional intelligence will result in the most desirable outcome. Human intelligence, then, is highly complex and nuanced. So when we speak of artificial intelligence, we now realize we need to be very clear what we are really talking about. When we reference AI, are we speaking purely of the quantitative and pattern recognition dimension of human intelligence that AI companies are working to replicate? Or are we speaking more broadly about the richly complex and nuanced tapestry of human intelligence? What does it mean to be working towards artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence? If we are focused only on the quantitative dimension, given that even the specialized and narrow AI agents available today are wreaking havoc on society through their presence in e-commerce, finance, lethal autonomous weapon systems, and social media. We must also wonder whether the general AI or super AI agents of the future might develop a form of consciousness specific to their own reality, and whether this variant of machine sentience will conflict with human sentience. What might this mean with regards to their ability to coexist alongside humankind, given that they will be exponentially more intelligent than Homo sapiens? This is incredibly worrisome, since most AI thought leaders believe we will achieve artificial general intelligence within a few decades, and because there are no principles of biology or chemistry, nor any laws of physics or mathematics that preclude the development of consciousness in AI. Conversely, AI can attain superintelligence while remaining asentient, and therefore agnostic to human ethics and morality. This raises the specter of many challenging questions in its own right. In summary, we need to spend more energy and effort within the artificial intelligence, neuroscience, and related interdisciplinary community, researching and addressing the issue of sentience alongside our work in the understanding and development of synthetic intelligence. As a science, artificial intelligence endeavors to understand the organic human mind and its ability for intelligence, with an end goal of simulating this intelligence in silicon and machine. We are making tremendous progress in this area, particularly in the last 15 years or so. We have amassed an impressive ability to aggregate enormous volumes of data, digital data, along with our capacity to design and build faster and faster computer processors that can process this data. We have also dramatically enhanced our understanding of neuroscience as it relates to deep learning neural networks. And we have translated this understanding into very high performance and effective machine learning strategies. But at the same time, it's important to point out that our collective understanding of consciousness or sentience remains opaque at best. The evolution of sentience, how, why, and the purpose of human consciousness persists as one of the greatest unanswered questions in neuroscience. We believe consciousness has arisen through biological evolution and has been enhanced further through cultural evolution. But that understanding of our consciousness, that understanding of ourselves and of our physical and social environment, and our understanding of the future remains mysterious. This ability to dream, to imagine, to plan and strategize seems largely unique to our species, particularly our foresight. The theory of mind states that humans attempt to see things from another's perspective. But we must first recognize that we have a mind before we can project this ability to think onto someone else. With certainty, only humans over the age of 3 have this ability to see things from another person's perspective, predicting what someone else is going to do and why they're going to do it seems unique to Homo sapiens. There have been more than 20,000 papers written on consciousness from diverse perspectives, including neuroscience, philosophy, psychology, and theology. However, despite so much study and reflection on this issue, we are still unable to offer a suitable and universally acceptable definition of consciousness or an understanding of how the brain works in this regard. Although we cannot provide an understanding of consciousness or sentience, there is universal acceptance that consciousness resides in the brain. An empirically sound theory of consciousness, unfortunately, does not yet exist. But neuroscientists believe we are getting closer. This understanding will be crucial if we are to safely coexist with artificial general intelligence, and then later with artificial superintelligence. Now, given this understanding of artificial intelligence in the context of human intelligence, we begin to realize that AI can and will likely have implications for virtually every aspect of our lives. AI will probably change the lives of individuals and the communities and societies in which they live, and it will influence many domestic matters along with relations with other countries, our geopolitics. AI will impact our professional lives along with the labor markets in which we participate, and it will impact commerce, finance, and industry as well. Consider, for example, the application of artificial intelligence in public health. Surveillance of a population has emerged as an important tool in the containment of infectious disease, such as in the case of the current coronavirus. Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan have done an admirable job in managing the COVID-19 outbreak. At the heart of surveillance in these societies is the use of artificial intelligence to identify and track individuals, so public health officials know whom an infected person has been in transmissible contact with. AI-enabled surveillance systems in use today can take a photo from one of the millions of cameras in a surveillance network and identify a person's face in a fraction of a second. Then the technology can be used to trace where the infected person has been and with whom they may have had close contact. Then people who are at risk can rapidly be notified that they may now be infected, and they can immediately be tested and, if necessary, quarantined. This testing, tracing, and quarantining protocol, TTQ, has been used very effectively in the aforementioned East Asian countries. In Taiwan, for example, a state that sits just 110 miles east of the Chinese mainland, there have been only 10 or so COVID-related deaths. Not 10,000, but 10. Taiwan has a population of about 22 million, approximately the same as the state of New York. But New York has had over 50,000 COVID deaths, even though this American state is geographically located thousands of miles away from the Chinese COVID-19 epicenter in Wuhan. New York residents have also suffered economically and socially as a result of a series of lockdowns. But in Taiwan, there were no such lockdowns. In fact, their public health officials consider lockdowns to be a very blunt instrument and a sign of failure by public health authorities to implement best practices in the containment of infectious disease. Since the onset of the pandemic, Taiwanese public health officials have ordered 250,000 people into strict quarantine for a period of 14 days, while the remaining 99% of the island's 22 million residents were free to continue life as normal, and the economy continued to function without lockdowns. Taiwan's vice president is a Johns Hopkins trained epidemiologist and was put in charge of their national pandemic response. He was essentially using American best practices in public health for the containment of infectious disease, along with Western technology in a society that accepted what they needed to do once it was explained to them and they were willing to cooperate. The result was outstanding and world-class. Sooner or later, Taiwan's response and management of a major public health crisis will probably be presented as a best practices case study for students in American and other public health programs to learn from. In terms of our individual health maintenance, other forms of surveillance can lead to successful personalized medicine. For example, by wearing smartwatches and by carrying smartphones, we can collect vast quantities of biometric data about our health that can be encoded and securely transferred to our electronic medical record, our EMR. When we use the toilet, stools, urine, and menstrual discharge can be analyzed in the bowl, and once again, vast quantities of valuable data regarding our health can be collected and also added to our EMR. With so much health data being collected about us, artificial intelligence agents can constantly analyze our EMRs and then compare them to the biometric data sets of millions of others with a goal of identifying the presence or sign of any pathology at the earliest possible point. This will usher in a new era of proactive, personalized medicine. By analyzing so much biometric data and identifying signals that have led to disease in other patients from the same age group, sex, or from with similar ethnic or race groups or lifestyles, healthcare practitioners will be able to identify and treat disease earlier and more effectively than ever before. In education today, it's nearly impossible for teachers to give personalized attention to every student and to address their personal education needs. But in the not too distant future, artificial intelligence agents will be available on every student's smartphone or watch, where they will monitor whether the student is paying attention. The AI agent will be able to notify the student and teacher if the student's attention is drifting, and will also be able to work with them after class at home to review the day's lessons as many times as necessary to ensure that they've understood things properly. Similar AI agents can also continuously monitor developments around the world that impact our studies and professional lives and inform us on what we need to be learning to ensure we are best prepared for a rapidly evolving labor marketplace. The AI agent can inform us of developing risks and can also interface between our brains and the internet at high speed via a brain machine interface, such as that being developed by Elon Musk's company, Neuralink, so we are not forced to type out all our inquiries. This takes us into the realm of a human machine hybrid, or what is often called a cybernetic organism or cyborg. Of course, the risk is that we are now bifurcating society into haves and have-nots, unlike any time, unlike any previous time since the birth of civilization in Mesopotamia some 12,000 years ago. We have archaeological evidence of social stratification going back to the earliest known human settlement of Eridu in southern Mesopotamia, about 6,000 BCE. And we have seen stratification in the Code of Hammurabi, the first legal code known to us. The Code of Hammurabi documented in the earliest human scripts of cuneiform on a stela, a stone pillar, in Babylon, circa 1800 BCE, about 4,000 years ago. In that legal code, there were three possible outcomes for a person found guilty of committing a crime, and the outcome was determined by whether one was a nobleman, a commoner, or a slave. In more recent times, following the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and in the early years of the first industrial revolution, we witnessed the subjugation of tens of millions across Asia and Africa as European imperial powers colonized the peoples of these continents and subjugated them in a manner so brutal and unspeakable that they are today loath to teach their past to the newer generations. These Europeans were mystics, that is, they had developed into societies who prioritized military, industrial, scientific, and technological knowledge above all else. Mystics, M-I-S-T-C. And since the peoples of Asia and Africa were still steeped in the ancient customs and stories handed down from their ancestors, they were unable to defend themselves against these modern European imperialists. Today, we know that the number one predictor of a person's socioeconomic status as an adult in America is the postal code in which they are born and educated. The property tax base within that postal code determines the quality of teachers, resources, and students in that community's schools. And by the time a student has completed their K through 12 education, their future is more or less determined. Imagine now the exacerbation of this problem when students from affluent postal codes who have access to the aforementioned AI agents for education, life monitoring, optimal physical and mental health intervention, and care from the beginning of life, and the advantages they will have over those from economically disadvantaged communities. Charles Dickens spoke of 19th century England and France as a tale of two cities. The direction we seem to be heading in the absence of awareness and very thoughtful planning with regards to fourth industrial revolution technologies such as AI and bioengineering is something potentially far more dystopian than Dickens could ever have imagined. Some of the surveillance technologies I've previously mentioned are already being deployed in very dystopian applications. In China today, there are well over 400 million cameras in use in public places, and the plan is to increase this number by 200 million by sometime in 2022. Essentially, every person in the country can now be constantly monitored, and this is certainly unsettling. In fact, the Communist Party has been developing a system known as the social credit score. In this system, each time a person is found to be violating Communist Party rules or acceptable behaviors, their social credit score can be reduced. After some time, a person may find out that they can no longer access the metro to go out to meet their friends in the evening. On their way back to their apartment, disgruntled, they might stop to pick up a few items from the local food shop, only to discover that the same set of items they normally purchase now cost 20% more than usual, and that some items, perhaps cigarettes or alcoholic beverages, can no longer be purchased at all. When they return to their apartment, they learn that their child has been rejected from a school or college where they had recently applied. And while searching for a new job, this person discovers that certain companies are no longer accepting their job applications. Unfortunately, such a system is not imaginary. It is very real, and it is being taken up by many authoritarian governments. And it demonstrates the potential for the abuse of AI-enabled surveillance and other powerful fourth industrial revolution technologies. Now today, America and China are the world's leaders in artificial intelligence. America is clearly number one, but China is catching up quickly. It's a remarkable achievement for the Chinese, given that just 6 years ago, they were only a nascent player in AI. But the Chinese Communist Party has identified AI as a strategically important technology and is committing to be the world leader by the end of the decade, if not sooner. The ruling Communist Party has a very carefully coordinated strategy with industry to manage their development in AI, as well as in other areas of science and technology they deem critical. Historically, China was one of the countries that found themselves subjugated by European imperial powers during the colonialist era, and they have decided not to allow history to repeat itself. This time, they will be amongst those with the power to subjugate. But what is the outlook for the rest of the developing world? Those countries in Asia, in Africa, and even Latin America, who have experienced the humiliation and suffering of colonialism and have lived under the yoke of European imperialism. Well, things are very different this time. With the rise of artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics, there is a rapidly declining need for cheap labor when compared to the need during the era of colonialism. As a matter of fact, there is a rapidly declining need of even many forms of highly skilled labor. Factories that produce advanced goods can now produce these goods and process them for shipping using only a small fraction of workers than has been required in the past. With the deployment of automation and robotics in farming and construction, there will be far fewer opportunities in these areas as well. Wealthy countries may respond to the declining need for labor by implementing schemes such as universal basic income, in which citizens will regularly receive income from the state. This money can be collected as tax revenue from extremely profitable corporations who are able to produce and sell goods while incurring very low cost due to the incorporation of AI, automation, and robotics within manufacturing, administration, and throughout the rest of the enterprise. But these universal basic income schemes, although politically contentious, will not be universal at all. In fact, the schemes will only be for the citizens of a particular nation or province. Citizens living in countries where there are no such advanced companies using AI across their enterprises will not be able to contribute to their state's tax revenue in this way. The subsequent collapse of economies in these countries, along with the environmental impacts from relentless climate change, particularly within the tropical and temperate regions of the planet, may trigger waves of migration towards countries with better resources, and will be a scene unlike anything we have previously witnessed in human history. These enormous waves of migration of desperate people are likely to trigger tremendous social unrest across the planet. We are facing enormous challenges as fourth industrial revolution technologies, such as artificial intelligence, emerge into and spread across society. Their coming ubiquitous presence will require sober examination and cooperation amongst responsible leaders across academia, government, industry, and nations, if we are able to successfully navigate our way across what is likely to be the greatest series of challenges humankind has collectively experienced since the birth of civilization some 12,000 years ago. Unfortunately, as these dystopian scenarios unfurl across society, we are witnessing a predictable rise in nationalism and populism. This is an expected response by the society in a time of unprecedented uncertainty, and clever demagogues stand ready to take advantage of such disquiet. In fact, the frightening economic and political situation unfolding across the society today, and the levels of income inequality not seen since the French Revolution, will only be further exacerbated as AI takes its place as humankind's most disruptive invention. The last thing I'd like to share with you today is an exciting but also concerning development in an emerging technology known as Connectomics. Aurora 21 is a supercomputer being developed by the United States Department of Energy at Argonne National Labs in suburban Chicago. A key application for this state-of-the-art machine will be in the science of connectomics. Aurora 21 and the Connectomics project will work to map the 85 billion or so neurons in the human brain, along with the synaptic links between each of these neurons into silicon. Once the human neural network is mapped, then, in theory, it is essentially preserved indefinitely. Although connectomics research is still in early stages and requires computational ability that can easily consume all available computing resources currently available on the planet, the implications of such a mapping are profound. It may yet take 4 to 8 decades, but once we succeed, we will have essentially extricated the human mind from its biochemical host and preserved it indefinitely in silicon-based memory chips and processors. Then each mind may have the potential to live on indefinitely. We have yet to understand the implications for succeeding in such an unsettling task. But much like the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technique pioneered by Jennifer Doudna of the University of California, Berkeley, and Emmanuel Charpentier of Max Planck in Berlin, and recently recognized by the Nobel Committee in 2020, there are many ethical and philosophical questions that we will need to consider. We do not understand the place or role of the human conscience as we move forward in this extrication of the human mind from its biochemical host. For example, will the conscience automatically transfer during this extrication process or not? And this will lead to tremendous controversy, ethical debate, and cause for regulation, much like we are currently experiencing in the field of gene and germline editing. Ethical and philosophical challenges notwithstanding, the potential for progress in such extrication and transplantation or transhumanism to silicon is staggering. So many of the ideas that have frustrated human minds for centuries suddenly become plausible and feasible. For example, the content of our mind, that is, our thoughts and ideas, our memories and personality, and even our conscience. This can readily and easily move from place to place, not simply on Earth, but across the universe and at light speed. This scientific and technological path makes mass Earth and space travel realistic for the first time in human history, while simultaneously disturbing the path of evolutionary biology with this alternative and profound path of intelligent design. In fact, the more we think about it, we find the possibilities resulting from connectomics are endless. At this point, you might be thinking that this is just science fiction, but in fact, nothing we are discussing is contradicted by the laws of physics, according to professor and theoretical physicist Michio Kaku at the City University of New York. We are now capable of exploring the universe as pure consciousness, traveling, when needed, at the speed of light, and then embodied in avatars or exoskeletons once at our destination. Of course, this does call into question what it really means to be human anymore. And we are uncertain about the consequences of embarking upon the connectomics and transhumanism trajectory, even though we are scientifically convinced that through silicon and artificial intelligence algorithms, we can potentially preserve human consciousness, memories, personalities, and thoughts indefinitely. Although we may be 50 years from rudimentary capability in these revolutionary sciences, by the end of the century, we may have realistic abilities for such preservation of certain aspects of human life. But what might we get wrong along this journey? And what might the consequences of these mistakes be? We are interrupting evolutionary biology. Is this a step forward for humankind? Or is it some form of an escape? These are questions that remain to be answered as Aurora 21 and other quantum and supercomputers enabled by artificial intelligence unlock the secrets of the human mind in the coming decades. As is now probably quite clear to everyone, the implications of artificial intelligence on our lives as individuals, workers, and as members of society will be profound and revolutionary. The impact to our business environment will be equally revolutionary as AI's capabilities rapidly encroach upon the domain of higher and higher value-added skills in the workplace. AI's behavior will resemble floodwaters in a low-lying region of the world now exposed to rising sea levels as a result of climate change. The only remaining option, then, is to move to higher ground. But in the case of AI, its own march to higher ground will be relentless. In a 2020 report, labor economists in Germany projected that during this decade, 800 million jobs will be affected by AI, with many being completely eliminated. These changes are unmistakable and will need to be, and society will need to respond, as in the case of climate change, sooner rather than later. The socioeconomic changes and therefore political implications resulting from such dramatic impacts to people's working lives is not something we can afford to ignore. It will be incredibly destabilizing to society. From the perspective of geostrategic implications and international affairs, the development of AI will have equally profound ramifications. With the power of AI, when paired with other technologies, including facial recognition and biotechnology, AI can be used as a very repressive tool in the hands of authoritarian regimes, with the ability to profile individuals and to know everything about them. Human liberty and other freedoms we hold dear are at risk of being lost forever. Adieu, liberté, égalité, or fraternité. In closing, these problems are all being further exacerbated as the world bifurcates into two distinct economic, sociopolitical, scientific, and technological ecosystems in the wake of the emerging Cold War between China and America. Let me stop here and we can address any questions you may have from my lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.
Wonderful, thank you. We have had a couple questions here coming through chat. The first one is what areas where AI has made great advances lectly? What areas have been resistant to AI?
Some of the areas, as I touched on in my lecture, we're seeing extraordinary benefit in the life sciences. For example, if you look at radiology, probably 75% of the world's population doesn't have access to diagnostic imaging, let alone access to a highly trained radiologist to examine various modalities of diagnostic images. But with AI, we have now imaging capabilities that have the quality of assessing diagnostic images to the same level and even higher of, say, a Stanford Medical School trained radiologist who might have 95% accuracy in their reading of medical diagnostic imaging, and the AI has 98%. So, combining with the ability to put the diagnostic imaging on less and less costly devices that are, say, several $1,000s and fit in a lab coat and can be used in conflict zones and in rural communities throughout the world where there is no access. So health science is a huge area, hugely beneficial area. Some of the more frightening areas, I would say, are probably the very rapid permeation of AI in lethal autonomous weapons systems, also in surveillance, in surveillance states. A couple of here in this chart, if you can see, just the staggering interest in surveillance technology that's being developed in China and other places. In Israel, who's also very, very good in the surveillance technology. Probably one of the primary drivers of this renewed friendliness between the Gulf states and Israel has to do with the desire to get access to this extraordinary technology for surveillance. Similarly with the Chinese, as you can see from the diagram, the whole world, even those that are quite high in terms of civil liberties score and in terms of political rights, um, it spans the spectrum of people who are interested in surveillance. Surveillance capitalism in the United States, for example, is something also quite concerning because, we give access to so much data to companies and pay nothing for access to social media, and we're just returning sort of data, which is a gift that keeps on giving for them, and their ability to profile us and to understand us and to get to that portion of our brain, our limbic system, our mammalian brain, where we have our impulses and our emotions, and their ability to play on that and to keep us engaged for longer and longer periods of time. So these are some of the dystopian applications. But I think that, in summary, I think I would say it's permeating everywhere, everywhere from the legal professions to the medical professions to, if you have seen recently, the floor of an Amazon fulfillment center and the AI and the robotics that are deployed there. It's moving very, very rapidly and it's really quite extraordinary.
Wonderful. I got another question here. What will be AI's contribution for caring for senior citizens?
It can be really, really, really powerful. The one thing about AI is that, if it's on your smartphone or your smartwatch, it can understand you better than anyone, better than any other human being, better than your spouse, better than, those that are closest to you, because nobody is closer to you than your smartphone or your smartwatch, which is with you, essentially every waking moment, and your smartwatch can be with you even while you're sleeping, collecting all manner of biometric data about you, knowing what triggers you, what makes you sad, what makes you happy. It's been with you throughout your day where your spouse has not been with you. It understands what upset you throughout your day, what made you happy. So it knows exactly how to behave with you based upon how you're feeling at that specific moment. And, in the unfortunate incidents that, and realistic episodes that we all face when, later in life, when a spouse passes away and we're left alone and we're aging, all that knowledge about us that leaves when our spouse departs, that information is there in the AI and far superior, to be honest, than what the spouse ever knew. So that's really an extraordinary and profound concept to know that that insight into who you are and what you've been through and your most intimate feelings and thoughts, and that AI knows all of those things. It's really quite a profound and revolutionary idea in terms of what happens to us, when we become elderly.
Great. I've got another question here. I don't believe AI could develop consciousness as they do not have a spiritual soul. So they're not able to use the intelligence that comes from the higher self. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that's it's a fair point. I think there's a lot of debate about it. Um, I think that there are probably two things I'd like to say. One is that, some of the thought leaders will say, there's no laws of physics or mathematics, no principles of biology or chemistry that say that you have to be a carbon-based entity in order to develop consciousness. There's nothing that precludes silicon-based entities from developing consciousness. Of course, we don't really everything in our world today, virtually everything can be modeled using mathematics. Virtually anything you can think of can be represented in mathematics and equation, with the one exception of consciousness. We just don't understand it enough. What your guest is saying may turn out to be true. We just don't know. But what we do know is there aren't any principles of mathematics or physics or laws of physics, mathematics, principles of biology or chemistry that preclude that. That's one important point to make. The other important point to make is that even without being sentient, AI today is really dangerous. So a lot of people talk about or debate whether AI might be dangerous in the future. And it's very important to note that nascent AI that we have today is already very dangerous in terms of some of the notions that I mentioned earlier, or the applications I mentioned earlier, with its deployment in lethal autonomous weapon systems and surveillance systems and social media, which is actually just a polite way of saying AI. Social media is essentially your interaction with AI. So yeah, just a few points to make on that.
All right, we've got another question here. Will the AI not perpetuate the bias of whom initiated the program?
It's an excellent question, and it's a very serious question, because the way we train AI is based on real world data. We collect huge amounts of data, show the AI this is a cat, and show it 100,000 images of a cat, and after that, it understands what is a cat. And so that kind of bias, there can be a lot of bias. For example, if you show AI employment data and say, help us find the best employees based upon, thousands and thousands of employment files, we find that the AI ends up recommending very high rates. It recommends white males. And that's because that bias is inherent in the data. So it's a very valid point, very important point. And there are ways around it. Synthetic data is an important area that is under consideration. Can you develop synthetic data and then magnify that data using various techniques? But it's certainly a very important question. It's certainly an area that we have to be very, very careful about, the bias in the data. In some areas, the bias in the data is exactly what you want. For example, if you're examining 300,000 diagnostic images of breast images, and you're looking for early signs of the development of cancers, those patterns are really, really important. But yeah, the inherent biases can be dangerous.
We've got another question here. You mentioned Taiwan was a step ahead of us when it came to stopping the spread of COVID-19. Why were the most advanced technological nations not on top of this pandemic? Also, what are your thoughts about the new world and world government who are very elite and will rule this world?
Regarding the first part, it's really, Michelle Galfond is a sociologist at the University of Maryland, and she talks about something called tight societies and loose societies within democracy. So most Western societies can be characterized as loose societies, in that we're fiercely independent. We really value our freedoms and our individual rights. And tight societies are found in the democracies of East Asian societies. They can be explained to them that, look, this is for the greater good. Wear your mask, social distance, get your vaccine, report right away if you're feeling these symptoms. So in that way, Professor Galfond characterizes us in the West socially as a loose society, that we really, really value our freedoms, and we really feel offended when people tell us, stay inside, don't go to work, wear your mask, all these sorts of things, impinges or infringes on our freedoms. On the other hand, we have to realize that it was the West, where in these loose societies, where the creativity and the dynamism produced, so many new vaccines in such a short period of time. So there's pluses and minuses. Politically, the West did a very poor job during the pandemic, in terms of, almost all major Western countries had lockdowns, had large numbers of deaths, overwhelmed health systems, and all the rest of it. Your viewers, your guests are very intelligent. They know this whole story. This was much less the case in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Vietnam, even Singapore. So, and regarding the second question, I think it's something that, this is probably the area in which I invest a great deal of time. So for your guest who raised that question, about AI and governance and in the hands of elites. I speak quite a bit about this in my podcasts, and I think my most recent podcast deals with democracy and how democracy has evolved and how AI will play a role in that. And it is very worrisome, no doubt, because AI can be used to strengthen democracy, but AI can also be used to strengthen autocracy, and it can go both ways. Now, in a democratic society, the surveillance of the society can be turned around, much like that camera on your iPhone, where you can flip it around from looking at someone else, flip it around and look at yourself. So in a democratic society, we can demand that as the state increases surveillance of the society, we demand of our legislators that we want to surveil our legislators. We want to know what they are talking about, what discussions are taking place. We want recordings. We want video cameras in the chambers. It's a democracy, and these people are representatives of us. So but you cannot do this in an authoritarian society. You cannot go to authoritarian leaders and say, we demand the ability to surveil the Communist Party leadership. So, at the end of the day, these are, the Chinese society and the American society, sort of the world leaders today. You can spend hours reciting all the positive things that China has done in the last 25 years. And then, of course, the list of worrisome things is quite long as well. And the same can be said of the United States. But still, I think that most thought leaders would say that the democratic system is something that it's still the least worst option. In the words of Winston Churchill, that democracy is the worst form of government humankind ever conceived, with the exception of every other form of governance that came before it. Sort of the least worst option. But when you apply AI to democracy, you can raise the bar and the quality of representative government to an extraordinary degree. Will we be able to do that? The future is not deterministic. It really depends on the decisions that you and I make. It depends on, and part of this is my mission of why I do what I do, is to sort of help educate societies that it's up to you. Do you want to engage with your representatives and your legislatures and find out, like, what's the difference between the Democrats and Republicans today when it comes to fourth industrial revolution technologies? Does any one of them understand AI and the other technologies of the future better than the other one? What are their policies? What are they planning in terms of legislation to protect the society and ensure that these technologies are used for their benefit? Really not much difference. So it really comes upon us that we start, in town halls and things like that, and asking these questions. Only then legislators become, sensitive to these issues and say, wow, my constituency is asking about this. I really need to get on the ball. I hope that helped.
Thank you. All right, so we've got another one here. It's part statement, as I really enjoyed your lecture. Thank you. And their question is, what is your artificial background?
Oh, as a graduate student many, many years ago, I was just enamored by AI. This is circa 1985. And my professors at the time said, Vicar, this is really interesting. Do you want to work on this? We have some people from the School of Pharmacy who are interested, and we want to do a program between College of Engineering and the pharmacy school and develop an expert system. AI in those days was so nascent, and really all we had were expert systems. Could you conceive of every possible input condition and then develop an output? This is essentially the technology that beat Garry Kasparov. It's an expert system of chess. But the real idea of AI, where you have an unbounded input, where you could have any kind of input and the AI knows how to deal with it. This modeling, the reference model of the human brain and the human mind and how it functions, serving as sort of a baseline to then build upon and sort of try to model the systems of the brain and the mind for AI. This is something that's just happened in, say, in the last 15 years or so. So, my interest definitely rekindled as we saw some of the advancements in the last 10 or 15 years. But I've been involved with AI for not quite 40 years, but 35.
Okay, so we're already after 8 o'clock here, so we'll go ahead and finish on one last question. Is any AI products are currently available to accompany or care for seniors?
Oh boy, I don't know. I don't know the answer. Probably the question is there something, pardon me, is there commercial applications there? I suspect mostly in the trial state still. I think in other countries there are actually um, embodied AI that are being used in that application. In Japan, in South Korea, they're developing embodied AI and experimenting, probably in China as well. It's really a big worry in some of the East Asian societies because historically they haven't had immigration. And so the societies are largely homogeneous. And over time, they're shifting to a more and more elderly society. So the care of the elderly is emerging as a very critical question. So I think there is quite a lot of work, but I couldn't point you to a specific company and say, here's an application or a commercial product. But I believe they're, if not already commercial, they're certainly pretty close.
Thank you. All right. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Vicar, for that very wonderful lecture and all the
My
interesting
pleasure.
things you talked about with artificial intelligence. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. This lecture was recorded, so give me about a week or so to get that out to everyone. But again, thank you so much for everyone who attended tonight, and I hope to see you at our next presentation. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining.